The release of the January 6th tapes is a critical and important exercise. We want transparency. We should demand that the American people do. We trust, House Republicans trust the American people to draw their own conclusions. They should not be dictated by some narrative and accept that as fact. So they can review the tapes themselves. We're going through a methodical process of releasing them as quickly as we can. As you know, we have to blur some of the faces of persons who participated in the events of that day because we don't want them to be retaliated against and to be charged by the DOJ and to have other concerns and problems. So that's a slow process to get it done. We're working steadily on it. We've hired additional personnel to do that, and all of those tapes ultimately at the end will be out so everybody can see them and draw their own conclusions.
Speaker Mike Johnson thinks that speaking in a calmer voice than Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene will distract people from realizing that he's just as radical and anti-American as January 6th traitors. Weird how he claims that he has to blur the faces of their foot soldiers to avoid them being prosecuted by the DOJ, when nearly 600 of them have already pleaded guilty, with 160 of that number pleading guilty to felonies. Seems like the felons agree with the DOJ. And as usual, Republican leadership is blowing up every precaution to put their political loyalty to Trump above the safety at the Capitol.
Was Democratic leadership given a heads up by Speaker Johnson that they were going to start releasing some of this video? And what's your reaction to it? I know there are some real concerns about safety of not just members, but people who work in this complex.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly dangerous. I said this over the last years. I'm not aware of any heads up that was given to House Democratic leadership before that. I viewed this as Speaker Johnson fulfilling a campaign promise and pledge. He had pledged to his conference that he was going to make it available. He didn't obviously care about the security and safety of the camera angles of what was being shown. That wasn't part of his calculus. He was running a campaign and fulfilling a campaign promise.
The MAGA reaction to reality is that it's just a crazy Democrat discussing the dangers. He's obviously doing it for political reasons. I guess it makes sense to them. You know how Liz Cheney, that Republican, the daughter of one of the biggest warmongers in history, is caping for the Democratic Party too.
If you look at what Donald Trump is trying to do, he can't do it by himself. He has to have collaborators. And the story of Mike Johnson is the story of a collaborator and of someone who knew then and knows now that what he's doing and saying is wrong, but he's willing to do it in an effort to please Donald Trump. And that's what makes it dangerous.
The Speaker of the House is a collaborator to overthrow the last election.
Absolutely.
Since Liz Cheney was booted from Congress and her party for telling the truth about Donald Trump and his obvious plan to overturn the election, Republicans just claim she's irrelevant because they couldn't handle the reality. They don't know that they look more like petulant traitors, eliminating a dissenting voice that they once loved. I wonder what conservatives think of Steve Bannon saying the same thing that Liz Cheney did about Speaker Johnson.
Here's the important thing of Johnson. He is part of the Trump era. All he's known is the Trump era. He won in 16 when President Trump came from behind to win in the great 16 election. He's been here. He was one of the intellectual architects of pushing back on the stolen election. And the audience understand, the mainstream media is now going to hound him as Biden legitimate. You just watch. They're going to try to tear this guy's face off because they're just dawning on them that he is by far the most conservative speaker in the history of the country.
He was one of the intellectual architects of pushing back on the stolen election. They say that like it's a flex, when their claims of election fraud were extensively heard and adjudicated 60 times, with Trump being the loser 60 times. And Speaker Johnson was one of the intellectual architects for that severe level of losing? Okay. Even Fox News has abandoned the outright lies that they were telling. But Johnson doesn't work for Fox News. He works for Donald Trump.
The allegations about these voting machines, some of them being rigged with this software by Dominion. Look, there's a lot of merit to that. And when the president says the election is rigged, that's what he's talking about, that the fix was in. I could give you example after example in all these states. I don't know how much time y'all have this morning, but there's some of these lawsuits have a lot of merit, and we need to exhaust all the legal remedies. But they know that in Georgia, it really was rigged. It was set up for the Biden team to win. And they have a Republican Secretary of State there that's under massive fire because he kind of went along with all of it. Nobody knows why. But when you have it on a broad scale, when you have, a software system that is used all around the country that is suspect because it came from Hugo Chavez's Venezuela, when you have testimonials of people like this, but in large numbers, it begs to be litigated and investigated. So many, 71, 73 million Americans around the country feel like that the election was stolen from them.